Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Well and truly into the summer break now for MotoGP. So a pause on the on-track action for the time being, but still plenty to get stuck into off-track. On the show today, who's under pressure coming to the second half of this season, a bit of MotoE news, lots of your questions answered too, plus much, much more. The recording date is Monday, the 4th of July. My name's Harry Benjamin. Joining me, as usual, Crash MotoGP editor Pete McLaren and former Grand Prix rider and British champion Keith Huewen. First of all, though, I've just come back, Keith, from the British Grand Prix. I know bringing up four wheels straight away is absolute sacrilege, isn't it? But I'm sorry, if you're a motorsport fan, I think you would have thoroughly enjoyed the British Grand Prix this weekend that Formula One had to offer. But I'm also going to be there in a few weeks' time for the MotoGP race as well, doing some bits in the fan zone. But on Thursday at Silverstone, there were 50,000 people there. There's no track action on the Thursday. Across the weekend, over 400,000 people. The stands were packed. The atmosphere was immense. And not to mention the music in the evening, the campsites. It was absolutely rammed. But I can't help but think that why does Formula One have that allure? And I imagine MotoGP, although it will be a big crowd when it comes to Silverstone in a few weeks' time, I don't think, correct me if I'm wrong, it will be on nearly the same level as the Formula One was.
Well, I think you guys got lucky because it was probably one of the best British Grand Prix there's been in recent times. So Formula One, well done. I mean, I think that coverage was brilliant. I watched the whole lot of it because I am a bloody petrol head and I can't not watch something as iconic as the British Grand Prix, even if it is Formula One. I think the big issue, and I've spoken to the managing director of Silverstone about this only a week or so ago, regarding British riders. If we had British riders that were of the level of someone like Lewis Hamilton, I mean, he was going for his 8th, British Grand Prix win. I mean, people turn up. It's amazing, isn't it? Brits are quite tribal. We are quite tribal still. In fact, sport is tribal. You get on one side of a team, on one side of a man or a woman. In many cases, it's a case of we go there to shout and holler for our person, our team. And I think that motorsport, it's quite remarkable, really, that you shout for a man, but you're also shouting for a team. So you've got two bites of the cherry there to a certain extent. But the reason why we don't have, the same kind of crowds now is because we don't have a proven race winner in the Premier class. Jack Doohan won the GP2 race this weekend. So Mick Doohan's son from MotoGP, 5-time, mighty Mick's son, actually won a race this weekend as well. So there's quite a lot of crossover there. A lot of people in the paddock that will be seen in the MotoGP paddock in a few weeks' time as well, because they appreciate great racing, and we're sure to have it. Silverstone is a fantastic racetrack. I mean, most riders love the track because it's fast and it's flowing. You don't get those kind of speeds on a lot of tracks nowadays. It's not got chicanes, it's not got Mickey Mouse hairpins, rah, 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 rah. So Silverstone is a great racetrack. But I think the reason for the crowds, atmosphere, well, bigger the crowd, the more atmosphere you're going to get if it's being catered for properly. When I was up there a couple of weeks ago, the atmosphere was there with the place empty. You've got hundreds of scaffolders and riggers putting up stands. Stuart Pringle, MD, said that if he could have got more personnel on site prior, he would have put more grandstands up to sell. He couldn't get the level of labour that he needed to put the stuff up. As it was, he was having to rent people in from Holland to come and put stands up. So I think the Lewis Hamilton factor, and Hamilton has caught the mood. In fact, no, it's not just Hamilton. Lando Norris, Charles Leclerc, George Russell, all great personalities, young personalities. And Formula One, since Liberty took it over, have allowed social media. We now know these people. You've got insight to it. Sky, as much as I have to say it, Sky TV, Sky F1 rather, do a brilliant job of bringing you those personalities. You see them in lights that you wouldn't see them in normally. So I think that Liberty, the broadcasters generally have done a great job in very few years of getting this back on track. We've watched Formula One in the past. You didn't know the names, you didn't know the people, weren't interested in anybody. The racing was absolutely rubbish, as it generally is in comparison with a Moto3 race, for instance. But here we are, biggest sporting event I've seen at the British Grand Prix for some time. Go back in the day when we didn't have grandstands and we only had terraces and we had mounds of earth to stand on. There was 120,000 people at trackside. When I was at racing in Grand Prix, 120,000 people there. When I went round on the truck, 120,000 people screaming and hollering. You knew you were in a big deal. I think things have also become more of a festival. I mean, for the MotoGP side, you can go on Thursday. Of course you can go on Thursday. It's the Day of Champions. You turn up for the Day of Champions. You do two things. You can get involved in what's going on at the track, and there's a bit going on, not a lot, but a bit, plenty for the charity side of things. And you can feel good about yourself by bidding on whatever it might be up on the stage. So, Day of Champions is an important part of the MotoGP calendar. And then you've got 3 days of free practice, qualifying and race day. It's not as big till we get more people in, but, and me and Pete have been talking about this before we came on air, they're still quite clever, Dorna, aren't they? They're quite clever. I'm wondering what the collaboration is between them and the American racing team at the moment. Hang on, an American racing team, yet we've just hired a Brit as a wild card. So we've got Rory Skinner, 20 years old still only, Red Bull Rookies winner, British Talent Cup Series winner, Supersport Championship winner by a mile here in the UK, up there in the BSB Championship, British Superbike Championship at the moment, still only 20 years old, gets his chance in Moto2 for 2 races as well, not just at the British Grand Prix, obviously the Austrian as well, the Red Bull Ring. Great. Turns out that the American racing team manage him personally. So they're trying to find him a place on the Moto2 grid. And because they haven't been able to, they've stuck him in their team. But it still seems like, to me, Pete, I mean, being the old dyed-in-the-wool cynic like I am, that it feels like a hand of Dorna is here somewhere for a British rider to be promoting the British Grand Prix just that level higher, getting back to your question, Harry, so that we get even more fans in there because we got another chance of a British rider. And don't forget what Jake Dixon did. This is exactly how Jake Dixon got himself into Moto2 and became the man that he is as well. He was a BSB rider, good one, and got a wild card at the British Grand Prix and I think the next round. I think he got 2 wild cards that year. And before you know where he is, he's in Grand Prix. Now he's a potential winner in Grand Prix.
There's
no answer any question, or did I just randomly go
on? We saw the French Grand Prix this year, didn't we? Fabio Quartararo, what a home hero does to the crowd. So I think just to underline that, and at the same time, we saw Mugello without their big home hero for the first time in 20 years, without Valentino Rossi, and it was one of the most disappointing crowds of the season. So there's clearly a link, and the people running the sports are aware of that, I'm sure. And as Keith says, there's good reasons why they're looking for the next guy. Cal carried the the hopes for the Brits, didn't he, for a lot of years, and there's no doubt that he brought a lot of people into Silverstone. But yeah, there's no Brits on the grid at the moment. So there's going to be a lot of focus though on Moto2, as you say. Jake Dixon, I mean, he'll be up there. I mean, could he get his first win? There's a lot of reason to be optimistic for the future, but. Yeah, I mean, that's to hear those crowd figures. I mean, 400,000 fans. And I think it also happened at COTA, I think, for the F1 as well, didn't it? I think that was also a similar crowd level. I mean, that's huge numbers. So, let's hope MotoGP, I mean, for MotoGP, about 250,000 is a big weekend crowd, isn't it? That's some of the most popular events. That's the sort of numbers you're looking at. So, 400,000, that's huge.
But you've got to cope with that kind of home pressure as well. And the downside to that is that there is so much extra pressure. And this is another reason why the Hamiltons, Lando, Norris, Russell, et al. Do so well. They are in demand. Every corporate event, every single thing for their team, every single thing personally, their family turn up, their friends turn up. It's the same for MotoGP. Exactly the same sketch. I think Lando Norris, who is famously a Valentino Rossi fan, which I tend to like about Lando as well, is that he reckoned 3/10. I think it's probably a bit optimistic giving you 3/10, but home support gives you 3/10. I heard him say it, and I remember thinking, blimey. Again, I think he was joking, but some riders, it does give that extra psychological lift. Others choke. It can go 2 ways. You can find yourself overriding. And again, with a bike, I don't know whether it's the same with a car. It must be, I would think. But, when you ride a little tense, a little stiff, a little, you override, you go slower. It's probably the same in an F1 car or any car or bike. But the second you stiffen up, you feel that pressure, you look to the sides, you see the size of the crowd, you see, the support you're getting. You don't want to let anybody down, that's for sure. But overriding or riding tight definitely is detrimental to a good finish.
It's a lot of pressure, isn't it, on these riders? You mentioned, the key might be having a British rider on the grid. APW _481 rolls off the tongue. Do you think someone like Scott Redding could rejoin MotoGP again, or are we can't look backwards? It's all about looking for a new, young, undiscovered talent now.
I think Scott Redding is where he is now. I think that, we're going to go through that transition period, aren't we? Because this 18-year-old age limit pops in next year. So straight away, it's going to ban a load of kids from coming up into MotoGP, even if they are good enough to come up into MotoGP. They're going to be hanging around in the Spanish Championship, the Italian Championship, wherever they feel like going. So it's going to add a dynamic to other championships around the world, I think, as well, because they're going to have to look at, where else can I go? What else can I do? Languishing for another 2 years, if you're a 16-year-old and you were expecting to come up into Moto3, that's a real problem for them and personally and for management. Now, for the Brits, as I've said so many times, because we mature a little later here, as in financially and in opportunity, I think that 18-year-old lower age limit is brilliant. In fact, I mean, there's been, some riders have turned around and said it should be higher for MotoGP. And I don't think it's a bad argument, to be frank with you, for everything to be dialed out, your education and your other parts of your life, and you've had a chance to live a little before you're thrust into the arena that is Moto3, Moto2, MotoGP.
I think it's very hard for, we're already looking at next year and thinking that there might not be any rookies. I mean, potentially Ayagura, but that might be it. We're losing 2 seats off the grid. So, for anyone to come in is going to be difficult. And so for Scott to come back, also Scott's a bigger guy. He knows how hard it is dealing with having a bigger size on these bikes. Some of our listeners might have seen the interview went up today with Danilo Petrucci. He was another guy who always struggled. And coming back to Keith's 0.3 of a second, now Petrucci reckons that's sort of what he was losing on the straights, just to put that in perspective. So yeah, he would have needed the fan power just to sort of make up for his bigger size. And Scott was another guy, his teammate to Petrucci at one time at Pramac, and he suffered from the same thing. And I think he's much happier now at Superbike. It's not such a big deal there, and you can be competitive as a bigger rider. So I think for Scott to come back in the future, he basically need to win the World Superbike Championship. I think that would be his sort of best route, to win it with a factory that has a MotoGP presence, and then that would be the next step. But I think it's I think Scott's he's done a lot of hard years in MotoGP. He's enjoying winning, and I know this year with BMW has not been so easy, but I think he's in a happier place now, I think, and so yeah, it's not easy to come back to MotoGP once you leave it.
No, not at all.
Well, I mean, you could flesh that out a little bit, Harry. You could flesh it out a little bit. I know your question's coming up because I read some of them this morning when they came in on the Twitter feed. So I think I know what you've got in front of you there. The one about Honda. What happens if Marc Marquez doesn't come back? Who are they going to replace? It was a shame they ever let Jonathan Ray go. There are always these top guys that have moved over to other series. Will they tempt the likes of Razgatlioglu? It's a question of where contracts are at the time that this becomes available, and when they finally pull the pin. Hopefully that won't be the case.
Well, I mean, you said the name now, haven't you, Marc Marquez? And there was a question that came in there. And Pete, there was an update, wasn't there, since we have last spoken? What is the update with Marquez at the moment?
Yeah, so he sort of released this blog post on the Repsol website, going into quite a lot of detail just on the background to the operation, basically saying that, only those really close to him knew how much he was struggling, which is no surprise because we all know that Marc keeps his sort of difficulties to himself. But yeah, he kind of kept a lid on things of just how much trouble he was in, and at the same time he was going for these checks and looking for options, and then finally gets the go ahead to have this surgery. I did actually hear that the figure given was 30 degrees, wasn't it? That they it sounds like they basically chopped the bone, turned it 30 degrees. from what I hear, that was actually it was actually a bit more than that. It was more like 33, 34. So people might think that they were exaggerating, quite the opposite. It was actually, so that's how out of line the bone had become. And now it's been sort of fixed back into its new place. But so, another big operation on this arm. And as you say, Harry, in terms of the future, Mark again made clear in this blog post that without doing this surgery, he might continue for another 1 or 2 years. Now, that might not sound like much, but his contract is for 2 years. So Mark was effectively saying that, he would leave his contract early after maybe 1 year if he didn't have this surgery. Now, for someone like Mark, who never gives up, who never wants to quit, that's a big statement, and it just underlines how much he was struggling. I also heard that actually, if you looked at the handlebar grips on Mark's bike at the end of the race, the left-hand side destroyed, the right-hand side like new. And, it just underlines how much effort was going on the other side, on the left-hand side, to compensate for this problem with the right. And, and that's why he was also starting to get new problems on the left-hand side, because he was overcompensating. So, yeah, he's, as far as where he is now, he's had the first medical check. He's not in any pain. Obviously, the first check, you've got to imagine the main priority would have been infection. After what happened previously, they would have been, looking for any signs of any infection. All clear on that. So, that's the first big tick as far as his recovery. Let's hope that there's no infection this time. And, there's lots of pictures of him on social media, isn't there? He's doing a bit of light exercise, that kind of thing. We'll have to wait and see. He said he's waiting for this x-ray. I think it's a 6-week x-ray. And that will kind of show how well the bone is healing. And then he'll have an idea of when he can come back. You keep hearing this figure of kind of the Misano test of sort of September time, because that's the first chance to work on next year's bike. He's missed these chances in the last 2 years to work on the bike, let's say, for the following year. And we've seen that, he's turned up at testing and it hasn't quite been what he's wanted. So I think it'll be pretty important for him to turn up this time at Misano and then Valencia. And of course, at Valencia, he will have a new teammate. We think it'll be Joan Mir, almost certainly. But I think it'll be important for Mark to just stamp his authority on this bike right from the start and make sure the bike is as he needs it. He's not in the situation that he has been prior to pulling out of this year, where clearly he was trying to adapt to the bike, but fundamentally it wasn't sort of the bike that he needs.
Clearly hasn't lost his sense of humour either. I think across social media, he's also been commenting on the other riders' Instagram posts. I think Alex Rins, one of them, being like, "Why are you always posting photos that always have an LCR Honda in them?" And then giving a little, what's going on there? So clearly hasn't lost that either. Talking of statements, actually, we should also touch early doors on what's come out from Lynn Jarvis. This was a little bit ago now, but I think it's worth bringing up again on the Fabio Quartararo penalty. He has to do a long lap round at Silverstone after being a bit naughty last time around, but debate around that. But Keith, I'll come to you in a minute, but Pete, just reiterate what the statement was, because it sounds like he was probably threatening to take this to almost the highest level you can at the court of arbitration.
Yeah, so obviously after the race, we had, let's say, the normal team press release, and Massimo Meregali, the team manager, made clear that, they didn't feel the penalty was fair. Then we had Quartararo posting on Instagram, this kind of, I'm not going to overtake again kind of thing, which obviously pinches salt and a bit emotional. But then on the Tuesday, we had this official statement. It was titled as an official statement from Lynn Jarvis, who's the managing director of Yamaha Motor Racing, pretty much as high up as you can get European-wise in the Yamaha racing organization. Now, Lynn is not someone who uses emotive language, who loses, he's very careful about what he says, very controlled about what he says, but really he kind of fired a torpedo at the FIM stewards. I mean, speaking about inequality, they were disappointed with the inequality of the penalties, the inconsistency. They felt like subjective standards, these kind of things. I mean, quite strong.
Dog's
words.
Not happy either.
The dog was furious about it, as you can tell. He's a big Quartararo fan, I think. So just adding to this whole, riders being angry with penalties, big surprise. But now it's actually escalating a bit into the very senior team management getting involved. And I don't know. I mean, whether we're going to see some sort of response from race direction, perhaps not. The FIM stewards, perhaps not publicly, but clearly there's some sort of communication issue here where they don't quite understand why certain penalties are being applied, and they need to thrash it out a bit. I can't remember quite when we've had a situation like this where it's been so sort of widely criticised in this way. Riders will always criticise it. They'll never like getting a penalty, but once it starts going into team management, I think you sort of have to address it a bit, don't you? And the big problem here is that, after Sepang 2015, that sort of season, they wanted to go to getting penalties done in the race, didn't they? They didn't want them dragging over to the following race. Well, here we are in exactly the same situation. The penalty decision was made 2 hours after the race, and it's dragging on to a race that will take place in a month's time. So, that was what we hoped would end by creating this stewards panel, that the decisions could be taken during the race and it would be done and dusted. And then you draw a line under it and you go to the next event. And unfortunately, this one's going to drag on, isn't it? And, Quartararo's going to turn up on Thursday at Silverstone and he's going to be asked about it. And then Friday and then Saturday and everything else. So, yeah, I don't quite know why the decision wasn't taken in the race. Obviously, Quartararo did retire from the race. He went on for another 15 minutes after the incident itself, didn't he? So maybe there wasn't time. But that would have been ideal. If they could have given the penalty then, even if it's a long lap and he didn't finish the race, well, who cares? They would have made the point that they felt it was something to be punished. As it is, it kind of feels like almost a double punishment because he lost a load of points, a load of places, and now he's going to have to do his penalty at Silverstone as well. So, yeah, coming back to the Yamaha statement, just finally, they mentioned 3 incidents with other riders that they said had resulted in riders falling or being injured and were not punished. Now, that's where they see the inconsistency. Aleix, of course, didn't fall down. He wasn't injured in any way, but still Quartararo got punished. So, yeah, it keeps running. Let's see where this is going to end. But it seems like there needs to be, the teams and maybe the FIM stewards need to sit down and just sort of thrash out common ground on the penalty situation.
Dirty laundry in public, never a nice thing. And I think that we've got to a situation now with Lynn Jarvis getting involved in this manner. He's obviously frustrated. There's a certain amount of politics being played at this. There's a lot more going on underneath the surface than we're ever going to know about, pushing and shoving. It annoys me greatly that they've been all going on about it. It's all very well Lynn Jarvis making the point that he's making. It may or may not be valid. In my view, the situation with Quartararo, he came from a little further back. He was pushing really hard to make the pass. It was a bigger mistake than the likes of Nakagami and one or two of the others. The subtlety mustn't be lost, but also you mustn't lose sight of the politics behind it and the reasoning behind the kerfuffle that we're seeing in public now. Lynn Jarvis, if that penalty had been, as you quite rightly say, Pete, if it had been awarded in the race, there's no appeal to that. You are going to do a long lap penalty. The fact that it's been carried forward into the next race, and as far as I'm aware, there's no real appeal as far as the Court of Arbitration for Sport's concerned either. I think that they're pretty much done with this. But the fact that we're washing our laundry in public is never a good thing. I can't understand why the Friday night rider safety session, this can be discussed. It can be carried forward into the manufacturers' discussion that they have as well together as all the teams come together to talk. They don't involve IRTA in it. They don't get Dorna. These are intellectually quite clever people. These are not idiots. We're dealing with high-powered, smart people. And here we are having a mudslinging session in public, blaming the scapegoat that is Freddie Spencer, who is a legend, and I will never, ever disrespect Freddie Spencer. His opinion is as valid as anybody else's, in my view, even if he might err slightly on the causal rather than the, as you put it, the consequences, Pete. The cause of the accident, was that great enough to deserve a penalty? If you look at the consequences of the accident, no, it wasn't. But the cause of it was, subtly, Quartararo was in hotter than Nakagami back a little while ago. I can't remember the other ones he was talking about as accurately without going back over the tapes. And to be honest, I can't be arsed with it because it's just going on too long and driving us all mad. Why we need to be washing our laundry in public, why these guys aren't dealing with it, if they're not happy with the way that the race stewards are operating, then why are they not dealing with that behind the scenes in the correct manner? Why are they unable to get a handle on the 3 guys that are our race stewards? If they're not good enough, then they should get shot of them. Michael Massey made that call that he made that cost Lewis Hamilton a championship, gave Verstappen a bloody championship, whatever you want to say about his decision. The fact was, quietly and behind the scenes, they dealt with it, moved into one side, and it was sorted. Something like that needs sorting here. But then you get back to the fundamental problem. Racing is racing. Do you turn around and say, okay, you can ram it up the inside and knock people about and barge into people without any penalty? There will always have to be a penalty. Someone will have to make a decision. This is not like, it's not like the green paint situation where you got a sensor out there, you go over it 3 times and you get a warning, 5 times you get a penalty. It's a situation where it's an opinion, and it's always going to be an opinion. We can't get it covered as clearly from all angles to scientifically analyze, the data from the bike compared with the pictures we're seeing. We'd be there for a month trying to work it all out. We'd be getting a decision on Assen, 3 Grand Prix down the road when they looked at every single scientific angle of it and had the data from did he brake in the same place that he broke the lap before, or was he later? These are all things that are on the data. They can look at it. It's all there. But did they? Probably not. Is the fact of the matter is, it was clear that Quartararo came in hot, was a little wide, took out Espargaro. Should he have got a penalty for that? Probably, is my opinion. What's my opinion? Absolutely worthless. Just like everybody else who's commentating on this at the moment. It's a situation where the call was made by race direction. Don't like the race direction call. You need to change race direction. If that's not working for the teams, the riders, and everybody else, and I agree that Freddie Spencer's position has become untenable now, and if I was Freddie Spencer, I would resign, just on principle. The fact is that I don't appear to have the trust of the riders now, or the teams. And once the big guns come out, like Lynn Jarvis, and start lobbing dirty, great big grenades into it, you're done for, really. But let me add one more thing. Nobody wants that job. When they got Freddie Spencer, I knew who the candidates were before, and nobody wanted to do it. Nobody still wants to do it. You've got a situation here where that job is available. If someone stands up and if you've got 3 credible men and they come rolling into the whole situation, the job is there to be done. Freddie Spencer is all very well, as I say, using him as a scapegoat, which he is, in my view. He's the man. He shouldn't even have a bloody name to it half the time. It should be the decision of the stewards, not Freddie Spencer. It's kind of like he's the guy that we all love to hate for the decision that's been made by 3 men, and widen it out by Dorna, by Erta, by giving the race direction the powers that they have to make that decision. It's a greater thing than Freddie Spencer, and that's what annoys me when people fire him off at Freddie. Freddie is he's a good guy. He's not biased in any way, shape or form. He's doing the job as best he can, given the situation that he finds himself in. And he makes a call. And his call was that Quartararo overstepped the mark by enough to deserve a long lap penalty. He made the call with Nakagami that Nakagami made up lots of spaces off the grid by a good launch, but when he was at the corner, when he came into the corner, he was braking in the same place as everyone else, but still lost the front. Clearly still a mistake, but there was no, overstretch, if you like, by Nakagami when he was at the corner. Anyone could have lost the front at that particular point in that particular circumstance, is how Freddie read it. Impossible task. Poison chalice. Have a sip if you fancy it.
Well, Keith, what's your calendar like these days? Have you got time for it?
Mate, if they paid me bloody 20 times what Freddie's getting, I wouldn't be doing that job. I think that I don't think he has the tools to do the job in the manner that it's now demanded of. I think that you need to be able to analyse exactly, did Quartararo squeeze that brake in the same place as he had done before? You want to have a look at all the data, take an average of it, and decide whether he took a lunge at it. Looked to me like he saw a bit of a gap, and Aleix Espargaro. And the other thing we talked about before, we've discussed it already. He underestimated how good Espargaro was. I think that everyone's underestimating at the moment how good Aleix Espargaro is. Aleix Espargaro might have been right on the bloody limit going into that Distrub and into that turn 5. And therefore, trying to get underneath him was going to create a problem. And that's the problem that Quartararo had. He had to, he was late on the brakes and he had to squeeze him a bit harder because Aleix was dropping down into the corner. If you underestimate the guy you're trying to outbrake and he's already on the limit, you're over the limit trying to outbrake him. And that's what happened. It's a situation where you've got to say as much to Aleix Espargaro's credit as it is to Quartararo's downfall. And I think they all recognise that. Aleix is no pushover anymore. But, you might have been able to do that, Aleix, Mark 1. But Aleix Mark 2, he's a World Championship contender and the Aprilia's working well and so's he.
Well, more questions than answers, I think, for the stewards to have to answer as ever. Your questions,
well, no, I don't think
stewards,
Harry.
coming in.
I don't think it is the stewards that have to answer it. It's not the stewards that have to answer it. I mean, they're all dead in the water. It's about the sport answering it. It's about what they are going to do to either replace the stewards they've got or replace the system of penalties that they've got. That's the way that they are going to have to do this. It's not about the stewards anymore. That's done and dusted. I think Freddie probably be Freddie's last year as a steward. And to be frank, I think he'd be bloody happy to be out of there. I mean, you imagine the flack he's getting and the sleepless nights he's having over the whole thing. Horrendous personal insults to a guy that's used to adulation in the past. It's horrendous, absolutely horrendous, and unjustified in my view. I think that Freddie Spencer is a good guy doing a job that he thinks to the best of his ability. Clearly, some riders are unhappy with him. Some of the calls he's made, they don't like. Riders are never happy. They're never happy with, are we going to race in the rain or are we not going to race in the rain? That's a load of shit. That's got nothing to do with the stewards. That's got something to do with, the rest of the management. I remember Scott Redding said, well, let's get on with it at Silverstone when it was raining and everyone else was bitching about not going out there. It's a situation that once it becomes inflamed and you lose the respect of proportion, it becomes viral. That's the other thing with social media. Once it becomes viral, then you get this campaign against an individual or something along those lines. And these are all modern day situations that we're all having to deal with. We're all having to get used to. And Freddie Spencer is you wouldn't want to look at your bloody Twitter feed or whatever it is for the amount of insults and stuff he's getting at the moment. He's nowhere near as popular as Fabio Quartararo. Fabio Quartararo is going to have millions of followers. Freddie Spencer is going to have half a dozen in comparison. So therefore, the weight of opinion is against Freddie Spencer all the time. It's like a big bully situation. Yeah, correct the problem. I agree. If there is a problem with race direction, correct it. But it's bigger than three blokes sitting in an office at a racetrack. It's got to be about Dorna, Erta. The teams have got to come up with a system. If they're unhappy with the one they've got to come up with a better system, not just bitch about the one they've got, in my view.
All right, then. Let's leave that there because I feel like we could talk about that for about an hour and a half. I was going to bring up the idea that Formula One obviously bring in alternating race directors. Maybe that's something MotoGP might start to think about. But you're saying it's bigger.
No, I think that's worse.
Sat in the office.
That's much
worse. Do you think?
Yeah, because you lose consistency. The problem is you need consistency.
But there's never consistency anyway. That's the main argument that most people have.
Exactly the main argument. Exactly that. But you're going to lose even more consistency. And we've been down this road where we've had different direction at different racetracks. The reason why we have travelling stewards and travelling officials is to try and make sure that it's consistent. I agree the system is not great, but how are we going to fix it? How is Dorna, Erta, the teams, going to come up with a better system? You can't just shout from the terraces that ain't right. It has to be politically something that you're going to change in a positive way. And I disagree with people lambasting Freddie Spencer for a decision he's made as race director. In fact, he hasn't just made it. There's three of them that made it. He's the one. The other two are probably ducking behind their desks, hoping they're anonymous enough not to actually get the kind of crap that Spencer gets. But being the big name, he's copping the lot. Yeah, okay, it's inconsistent. Okay, what do we do about it? Let's get it changed.
All right, then. Let's get it changed. Keith's on a mission there.
Your
questions, lots of them coming in. Lots and lots and lots of them coming in. And this is a nice question, actually, from Gala 37. And considering we talk about the American racing team right at the start of this show, of course, bringing in a Brit. But Gala wants to know thoughts on American riders. In the 80s and 90s, they were the benchmark. In recent times, that has disappeared. Are there any potential Grand Prix class winners in the current Moto2 trio, or is there someone else to keep an eye on perhaps? So looking at the American riders.
Well, I mean, having
Shall I
had
go first?
quite a lot of time with Kevin Schwantz, Wayne Rainey and co at the Festival of Speed, you've got to say Moto America, which Wayne Rainey is the head of. He's obviously trying to get the domestic series back up to speed so that they can start shipping their guys across. I mean, things have changed hugely, haven't they? I mean, it's not the same as it was back in the early 70s. Your Kenny Roberts. I actually had bloody dinner with Kenny the other night as well. I mean, if you sat with him, it's enlightening to say the least. He's so far in the past in the way of thinking. Our modern day of dealing with stuff is so completely different to how it was back in the 70s, obviously. But it's kind of, at the end of the day, it's catching the imagination. It's catching that wave almost, isn't it, of enthusiasm towards it. We talked about, Dorna being involved in Jake Dixon as a wild card, Jeremy McWilliams before him as a motorbike racer. That Dorna weighed in quite heavily with his funding for his team to make sure he was on the grid. It's a global marketplace that Dorna are trying to. I struggle to say the word manipulate, but that's exactly what it is. In that they are trying to make sure that each marketplace has suitable riders in the Grand Prix setup and on the Grand Prix ladder. Wayne Rainey is head of Moto America. They've given us Cameron Beaubier. I never expected Cameron Beaubier to come across and be as quick as he's been. I genuinely didn't think he'd be. He's older, 28 years old, I think, when he came across. And I never expected him to be quite as good as he turned out to be. Now, there might be one or two more gems over there, but you tend to find that European riders at the moment are riding on Grand Prix tracks. In Moto America, they're riding on, potentially nowhere near as necessary safe racetracks. Great racing, great interest, great spectacles, but it's not like Italy or Spain or even the UK have got two Grand Prix homologated tracks really in Donington and Silverstone. So you've got a situation where the training ground is quite dilapidated and the pool of riders coming through is quite small in America at the moment. Same in Australia. You only have to have a look at Australia. Australia was a dominant force once upon a time. That's drifted away. Modern motorbike racing has changed face slightly. It's tough.
Just to back up what Keith's saying about the tracks, that's also what Petrucci said when I asked him, what do you think about Moto America and trying to get riders over to Europe? And he said, the trouble is that a lot of these tracks are basically car tracks. And they're bumpy. It's like racing on the streets. He said in some ways he compared it to the Italian Championship, but he said in the Italian Championship what they do is they go to sort of the same track several times, and he thinks that's actually better than trying to do a variety of tracks, some of which are just not suitable to, let's say, top level motorcycle racing. So there's two different approaches. Obviously, Moto America is trying to get to as many places as possible and spread the word and build the sport, but from the rider development point of view, they need to be on the highest standard of tracks where, for example, the track surface is consistent, the grip level is consistent, so the riders learn how to push to the absolute limit. And Petrucci was saying that some of these tracks, the car tracks, in quote marks, if you like, that are quite sort of battered and pot marked. It might look great racing, but he said it doesn't really teach you how to ride on the limit when you come over to Europe. You've also got the age limit thing as well, which, as Keith has mentioned, it might be a good thing, this raising the age limit. Traditionally, so the non-European riders have suffered more, haven't they, from this young age limit? All the mini bike tracks that they have in Europe, where kids can jump on bikes at sort of 4 and 5 years old, that's sort of been lacking in sort of the western parts of Europe or in America and Australia. So a combination of things. And as Keith says, Cameron Beaubier, it's so close to the podium. I mean, you just think if he could just get that podium under his belt. What could he do? Because he's been there or thereabouts, and we saw at Assen. Fortunately, it slipped away again, but he's got the speed. Joe Roberts, of course, has won a race. It was okay, that race that a lot of the leaders didn't start because of the chaos with the rain in the first one. But there's guys there that are just bubbling under the surface, and if they can get that consistency, there's probably an equal chance of an American getting into MotoGP as a Brit at the moment, you would say, really. I mean, I think if you look at the Brits have got Jake Dixon and, say Rory Skinner on the horizon. You've got Joe Roberts, you've got Cameron Bobbio. America and the UK are in a kind of a similar situation where there's guys that potentially could make that step, but at the moment, there's still guys that are quicker than them in Moto2, and that means it's a tough call for the MotoGP teams to pick them. You've got to really... To turn heads, you've got to really, be a multiple winner in Moto2 at least, haven't you? And ideally be the champion.
Kenny Roberts, not Rogers, Roberts. You bring him up, Keith, and Todd has said, and this is a nice segue, I think. He said at Goodwood, he doesn't understand why in MotoGP the racing's so good, but one person can win one race one weekend, but then that same person can be 17th the next. Why is that happening? It's already hard enough for rookies to break into MotoGP and then perform well. But when this is happening to even the most experienced and the best riders, why is it happening? Is it the bike, the track? Is it tyres? Is it a mental state? What's the deal?
It's all of them. I mean, that's the great thing about MotoGP as it is now. I mean, it's rules-wise, Dorna have slowly but surely chipped away at getting this equality situation done. The last bastion of that was really the electronics, the ECU and the inertial platform, the two brains of the bike, if you like. Once they've got to the spec version of that now all the teams have to run rather than running their own, it meant that the playing field is now pretty flat. All of the bikes, it's the remarkable thing about our MotoGP rules. So many different configurations of chassis and motor, and yet we're all within. The whole bloody field can be within a second of each other in through practice. It's remarkable, and you've got to say that it's. I mean, of course, it does create problems through the three classes: Moto3, Moto2, MotoGP. When the racing is so close, when you get a disaster in the middle of it, of course, it takes out several riders. And so the safety issue is that nobody's as spread out. So there's not as much room to maneuver in those situations. So the penalty of being so successful is that. But the fact is that tyres. So tyres on a different configuration of motorbike might work fractionally better for some on one track and fractionally better for another on another track. The performance of a bike, Yamaha versus Ducati, although Ducati's better at turning now, mid-corner speed and the like, is miles better than it's ever been. So the Ducati's working well, but the Yamaha has always been a little bit better in the middle of the turn. It turns better, and he's a little slower in a straight line. So you've got these things that balance out over the entirety of a lap, and that's why they're all so close, and that's why we have so many differentials in. And then you come to the mental state. Of course, that is an issue as well, depending on the track you're at. And we've already touched on it. British Grand Prix, home Grand Prix, win or choke is the two ways it can go. It can be overawing because of the fact you're at your home Grand Prix, or it can lift you to something spectacular. You've mentioned Petrucci many times already, Pete, and Petrucci at Mugello was something just a little bit special. It's one of those situations where I love it the way it is. The problem we've got at the moment for me is that MotoGP, with the technology the way it's gone, has actually probably given us slightly worse racing than we've had in previous years, in that the aero and so on is created a situation where it's much more difficult to do some of the things that would be normal in a motorbike race. So kind of they'll be looking at that. I mean, I think we've got some changes coming up next year anyway, and the ride height adjusters and stuff like that, they're going to get banned for 2023, and all I can say is thank God for that, because it hasn't really brought us anything much. And what it's done is it's brought us closer to difficulties in entry speeds into corners. As soon as you increase velocity in certain parts of certain tracks, you end up with a track that's out of date and not got enough room to run off. If somebody's approaching a corner and can now get into the corner a lot deeper and a lot faster, if that lot lets go, you end up reaching the barrier, where in the past it would let go 10 yards earlier and wouldn't reach the barrier. And that's the simplicity of it. But of course, it does become an issue for MotoGP organisers at some tracks. You can't, a lot of tracks, naturally widen the barrier. It takes a hell of a lot of planning and a hell of a lot of money to achieve that sometimes. So, by dropping the shapeshifter, you might end up with a bike that can't get out of a corner quite as sharp as it perhaps will do when it sits down and goes down the straight like a drag bike when it's delivering 300 horsepower to the rear wheel. Likewise, when you're coming into a corner, it changes the way the bike reacts on the way in. So you're going to be a little slower perhaps on the way in. Yeah, okay, you can change tyres. You can give tyres a little less grip. You could ask Michelin to give us something with a little less grip, but you kind of straight away then you kind of falsifying the reality of what we're all trying to achieve in a prototype sport. We're trying to get excellence out of what we're doing. We're going to see things change naturally over the next few years anyway, with the fuels that we use, which with a bit of luck will just knock the edge off some of these bikes. So therefore, you might be okay to run some other kind of development because the bikes aren't quite as sharp in a straight line anymore. We've kind of reached a pinnacle here at the moment, I think. I think that tracks, quite a lot of Grand Prix tracks, suddenly people are scratching their head and thinking, well, that ain't quite as safe as we thought it was 5 years ago, just because of the speeds these bikes are pulling in the middle of the corner or the way into a corner. All of that will be changing naturally over the next few years. MotoGP are thrusting towards a sustainable fueling type situation as opposed to going electric. I know you want to go there, Harry. I can feel it. But it's, some people are pushing more and more electric wise. Ducati obviously have now got involved with the Moto2 project next year. We'll see where it all goes. I just feel that the kind of propulsion systems we've not settled on any one thing yet. Okay, publicly we seem to have settled on plugging our cars into the wall, but I just don't think that's finished yet. I think that we've got a lot more development going on in racing, and that's as it should be. That's what racing is for, is to develop systems, to develop something that's going to benefit the rest of us in some way into the future. Hopefully MotoGP's way is the right way.
Well, speaking of the future, and we all know MotoGP is going electric imminently, don't we? Maybe not quite, but look on your face. MotoE, Pete. We'll end with a bit of MotoE chat, I think, just because we never talk about it really. Let's be honest, but there is a little bit of news, as Keith alludes to. Ducati obviously taking over supply of MotoE from Energica with the 2023 races being built, and a bit of news about that. They're going to be lighter, but they're still heavy. So just a bit of a heavier, lighter, something like that.
Yeah, it's the glass half full, half empty thing, isn't it? Do you look at the weight saving, or do you look at what the weight will still be? So they managed to knock off about 35 kilograms from what the bikes are at the moment. So that's a big saving, and it seems like it's 12 kilograms under the target weight that Dorna gave them. So Dorna obviously recognised that these things being as heavy as they are is an issue. Now, the bad news is it's still, I think, 225 kilograms. Now, to put that into perspective, a MotoGP bike is 157 kilograms. So that's the difference. Now, and if you those suitcases you take on the plane, the big suitcases, they're normally 20 kilograms, aren't they? Because that's normally your limit. So if you've got a MotoGP bike, you put a suitcase, and another suitcase, you'd be almost as heavy as a MotoE bike, just to give people an idea. Now, I think this is really this weight figure is interesting because Ducati, obviously, their history in racing. If anyone could build a lightweight electric bike that performs well, it's Ducati. And I think this shows that with the current levels of electric technology, this is about the best that you can do. And Ducati made clear that they favoured the weight side of things. They could have gone for more power. They've kept the power at about 150 horsepower, which is what the Energica bikes have. They went for the weight saving. But, this shows you that really, I think this is about the best you can do, and it's still a long way off. I know MotoE is not a Grand Prix class, but it's a long way off the 3 Grand Prix classes in terms of weight. And lightweight really is the thing, isn't it? For a Grand Prix class, 2 or 4 wheels, it's the weight, it's the lightweight that makes them special. So, yeah, as Keith says, maybe this shows that it's a bit early for this, for this electric technology. I think the battery weight was given as 110 kilograms. Now, a MotoGP fuel tank is 22 litres, which is 22 kilograms to make, 300 horsepower. And that shows you what you're dealing with here, just in terms of trying to squeeze the energy into a small weight-wise shape in terms of fuel versus batteries. And this, as I say, this is a big step compared with what's there now, but I think it does just underline that it's going to be a long time before an electric bike can perform at the level of a Grand Prix machine. So we don't know the lap times yet, obviously. We'll have to wait and see for that. At the moment, they're kind of Moto3 pace. We'll have to see. As I say, there's no more horsepower coming from the batteries. It looks like the torque will be even actually reduced, to presumably, again, the weight-saving side. But again, the lighter weight should help with the lap time, but it's not going to turn them into competition for MotoGP overnight. So I think it will remain, very much a World Cup. It's a support class and everything else. But yeah, those are the figures. It was interesting because it's the first time Ducati have actually, given some specs on this bike. So we now know what to expect for next year.
I think what Dorna have done is they've covered off a very necessary avenue in development. I think that they've given Ducati an opportunity to look at what current technology will give us in a racing class. And I think all it's done is it's proved that we're not there yet, as you've said, Pete, with battery technology. Now, is battery technology going to get superseded by something else down the road? I think it will be. But we'll wait and see. But the fact is that Dorna have been quite clever in that the development of battery power is going on sort of peripheral to the main MotoGP classes. It's a World Cup, as Peter has said, compared with MotoGP. MotoGP is going down the sustainable fuels route, again, which is a favourable avenue. How that all pans out as far as the wider world is concerned, we'll see. I mean, I think we're pretty well committed to electric cars and the like, which I think from a city perspective, if you live in a city, a bunch of electric cars in there has got to be a benefit. If you've ever lived in Bangkok like I have, or London like we all have at some stage, it's a stinking mess. It always amuses me when people are running around the park in the middle of a city somewhere, sucking up mouthfuls of polluted air to try and enhance their muscles. They'd be better off taking a holiday and running on a beach somewhere. That would work a lot better than in a polluted city. So I think electric vehicles in inner cities is great for everybody, great for your kids, great for your environment. But I'm not convinced that it's the total way forward. I think we're going to end up with something that comes out hydrogen power or whatever it might be. We've got we had that H24 whatever it was racing car up the hill the other day, didn't we? A combination of all sorts of technologies all in one package at the Festival of Speed. It was a hydrogen powered electric, everything was bolted to it one way or another. And maybe we're going to end up with a hybrid at some later stage, who knows. But it's good that Ducati have got it lighter, but I think all they've done is they've proved that we're still, as you say, Pete, not quite there yet.
Well, if I needed any excuse to get out of running around my local park, that was it. Don't want to engulf all the fumes that are surrounding where I live. Excellent. Thank you for that, Keith. You make a valid point, though. But it will be very fascinating to see the progress. As we spoke last year, of MotoE and the electric, hydrogen hybrids and how that's all filtering into what we're seeing in the future of motorsport too. What a varied show. I think we went everywhere with that one. Lots to chat about still. a lot of questions that we just haven't got through, but good thing is we've got a few weeks to get through them all. So, we'll make sure we do, and we'll come back and discuss more next time around. In the meantime, though, plenty to check out on crash.net, all the latest news, analysis, lots of features too on there. So do go and have a look at that. We'll be back with you next week. Get your questions in, although we've still got a lot to get through, so maybe hold off on that. But we always like hearing from you. Comment section or tweet, Instagram or Facebook us. Just search Crash MotoGP. Don't forget to leave us a review wherever you get your podcasts, and we'll see you right here next week. Bye-bye.